and welcome to Ask PwC Singapore, a new podcast series that answers important questions for businesses. I'm Claressa Monteiro. Singapore just delayed mandatory climate reporting by 3 to 5 years. So what does this delay really mean? And how do we make sustainability actually sustainable for business? Joining me are two excellent guides, Kok Beng Soon, CEO of the Singapore Business Federation, and Marcus Lam, Executive Chairman of PwC Singapore. Let's get real, so you can act with clarity and build real value in your sustainability journey. ACRA and SGX have just extended the timeline for climate-related disclosures. What does that actually really imply?
Sure, let me start. The way I look at it, there are three conclusions that you can draw from this delay. I think number one, I would like to credit that SGX and ACRA are listening. Right, we have given feedback to them based on ground engagement with businesses on the challenges they have, and they have heard us. Number two, I would like to characterize their approach to be one being practical and not being dogmatic. And then the third, I would say that it shows that they understood that it is important to focus on quality then rather than to go through the process and kind of check the box. And I'd like to take this opportunity to kind of unpack, this delay that you talk about.
Right.
And I'll do it in three parts. It's important that businesses understand what are the components that are being delayed and what are not being delayed. So the point number one that I want to make is that as far as Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions are concerned, there is no delay. All companies, the listed, whether you're big, you're small, you're still required to report by FY 2025.
Okay.
Point number two, as far as other climate reporting disclosures are concerned, companies who are on STI, which are the top 30 companies, which are the biggest and the most liquid, compliance deadline has also not changed. They're supposed to report by FY 2025. But for the remaining companies on SGX, which is probably about 550 odd companies, you're right to say that delay has been given for either 3 years or 5 years, depending on the market cap.
Right.
If you're more than $1 billion, which is about 60 odd companies, the delay is 3 years up to FY 2028. Then for the rest, which is less than 1 billion market cap, the delay is, as you have pointed out, 5 years to 2030. Now, the third point that I want to make is that for Scope 3 emissions, again, if you are the top 30 companies, no change. By FY 2026, you have to report. But for the rest of the companies on SGX, it's now voluntary. So what it shows is that the authorities here are taking a very calibrated approach in doing mandatory requirements. It's really the more resource-intensive reporting requirements, such as requiring companies to do impact analysis, right? Financial impact analysis on risks and opportunities, require them to compile this emission data from companies that are supplying to them that's not under their control. These are the ones that are actually being delayed. And for good reasons, because of the maturity of the ecosystem and the resources that's needed to do those work.
Could we look at it as a second chance for smaller cap companies to get ready, Marcus?
Our government has taken a look and see what they can do to support businesses. I think this delay will allow time to build capacity, to understand the requirement, right, and to work internally of what they can do, right, to adjust themselves and get ready to support and adjust in terms of meeting the requirement. So I think it's a good timing. The only downside is I think every other countries, especially in the region, some countries like Australia, they have continued to push forward. So in that context, you may see it as we're a bit behind. But we have to acknowledge that getting behind, but getting high quality.
I totally agree. I think in this case, as I mentioned earlier, it's about being pragmatic. And the good news is that when we engage many of the listed companies, the smaller one, after the announcement has been made, other than bringing a sigh of relief, they did assure us and authorities that it does not detract them from the preparatory effort that they're doing.
So we're not backing down on our sustainability goals?
No, we're focusing on quality rather than just checking the box.
Okay, so are Singaporean SMEs moving fast enough? Or are we still stuck in PR mode sustainability?
My friends in the SME, whether it's in logistics, retail, F&B. Honestly, everyone look at me and say that they are not in PR mode. What they're struggling with is sometimes lack of understanding of where sustainability should be. They have to deal with very clear challenges that we see in the market at the moment: economic uncertainty, right? Cash flow issue, survival issue. So smaller SME across those sector has been sharing with us. Those are real issue on the ground, and so how would they be able to address those real issue with this that's coming? So clearly, in my mind, they are not in PR mode.
You agree with him?
I totally agree. And when we spoke to 500 over SMEs last year in a survey, consistently they told us they face 3 key challenges. And I call it the 3M, not MediShield, MediSave. But really, number one, I think they lack the capacity and the capability to do things in-house, which is manpower. Number 2, yes, there's a lot of solutions out there, but they're just not aware of that. And that's what I call method. And the third one is, of course, no price for guessing. They just don't have enough financial resources, not enough money.
Wouldn't they say money would be first?
Yes, money is certainly important, but let's also not forget that if the money you have, you still need to get the resources in terms of manpower and method.
Money buys manpower.
It does buy manpower, but I think it's important to prioritize along these 3. But at the same time, because of all these challenges that SMEs faces, they're not fast enough to respond to the changes in the market. And there are increasingly cases where SMEs realize that if they don't spend some time to do that, they get kind of green out from the supply chain. And they may think that they are not supplying to MNCs or international, but domestic. And I'll give one example, right? We know of an international school in Singapore that put out a procurement tender to buy buses to ferry their students. And in their procurement specs, they require the bus operators to submit their baseline emissions data. Guess what? Many of the smaller bus operators are just not prepared to do that. First of all, they haven't figured out what is scope 1, what is scope 2, what is scope 3, right? So they were not able to participate in the tender. Right, so this is an example of an international school based in Singapore, but they had to take compliance requirement from their HQ outside of Singapore.
I think over a period of time, you'll find that the requirement either from HQ, the requirement coming out from the customer or internationally, will continue to increase. We don't see that slow down. Actually, when we work with SME and we speak to the region, it's quite clear that this requirement is here to stay.
It's interesting you say that, because I think if more businesses realize that there is a positive financial impact to this, they'll embrace it faster, right?
Whether it's on electricity, whether it's on waste is plenty of opportunity, whether it's on packaging, whether it's on transportation, and all those differences, it adds up. And I come back to the point, you will have a competitive advantage, whether it's on cost, whether it's on branding, whether it's on reputation, right?
Okay. Now, let's go to SEFR. In a conversation we had earlier, you said it's a welcome development, but why did it take so long? What were the roadblocks? How did that delay affect business? So many questions, Bing-Su. Maybe you can break it down for us.
So it stands for the Singapore Emission Factor Registry.
Okay.
And just to explain a little bit of technicalities, what is emission factor? So we talk a lot about carbon reporting, right? So carbon reporting is to be able to translate all the operational activities you have into what they call greenhouse gas emission. The type of operational activities could be in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of electricity. They're all in different matrices, right? But now we need to change it to a thing called GHG. So to translate from this to this, you need to multiply with a number. So that number is called emission factors. So the question is, what took so long, right? Yeah. Well, I think, there's all this story about a story of everybody, somebody, anybody, nobody, that kind of story. But I wouldn't repeat the whole story. But I think this is a case where everybody saw a need. Everybody felt that they have a part to play. But it was not clear that it is a problem that's owned by anybody. Right. So as a result, things did not move along quite far. And actually, I would like to credit PwC. This very idea of the need, this problem statement was actually articulated in a Forward SG conversation that PwC hosted with Minister Grace Fu. In, I think, 2022, thereabout. In that conversation, the industry gave feedback to the ministry. They said, hey, Minister, we need localized emission factors. Because if you don't have these localized emission factors, companies will have to use factors from the US and from the UK. And obviously, the operating conditions in US and UK are different. Just look at the energy mix that we have used to produce electricity, obviously very different from UK and US. Even our public buses, our cars, are very different. So if you don't have the localized factors, companies like the Singtel, the big companies, who have to use US and UK factors to multiply whatever they do
Which
here.
wouldn't be ideal.
Obviously, it could
Yeah.
be either too high or it could be too low.
Yeah.
So it's not accurate. And if you don't have things that's accurate, that cannot be the basis for any decision making. So that was the problem statement. So, but as I said, it's like nobody kind of own it because you need public factors, you need private factors. And by the way, the number of factors is not trivial. UK has about 700 of these emission factors.
That's not insignificant.
That's not insignificant. So SBF was called, I was called, saying, SBF, do something about it.
The SBF volunteer.
SBF was volunteered.
Was volunteered.
And we were volunteered, but I also recognize the importance because this is a problem of the commons, right? And I think as the business, Apex Business Chamber, we know that this will benefit the industry. We know you need to work with the private and the public sector, and so we lean forward to do that. And we managed to pull together a coalition of like-minded partners that involve MTR and MSE. And those two are important because they are the ministry that owns the agencies that produce many of the public EFs, including water, electricity, waste, and so forth. But we also brought together A-Star. And we wrote in PwC. We wrote in Singtel.
Well, since it started with them.
Since it's their conversation, you better own it, right? But more importantly, because PwC is a preparer. They work with many companies. And Singtel is one of the STI companies, so they know what is needed.
Right.
And then we wrote in SBF Foundation, which is a social impact arm for SBF. And once we got that together, I would like to think that it didn't take so long. We announced the partnership in April last year. In October last year, we had the first iteration of the SEFR with 200 over factors that can complete about 80% of Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions for most people. And come October, in the first anniversary, we'll be making further announcement of a new set of EFs to be published.
Okay, Marcus, since it started with PwC Singapore, I'm wondering what was the driving factor? Was there a gap that you saw, that you raised? What was the opportunity?
So, just like Ping Sun mentioned, actually, what we do is we have hosted many of the clients, right, in the market together with government agency. And so all this conversation actually was trying to find, what's really the challenge and the pinpoint in the market. It gets even more difficult because as more and more people comes to measure the emission factor, I think that challenge is that it's just not representative. It's not representative of the condition in this region. There are also international emission factor that's available elsewhere that they provide. It's a baseline for anyone that operate in those regions that you can calculate. Those stuff then force us to rethink that what else can we do for this market? This is something that not just Singapore company will benefit. I just want to expand a bit that if you look at the entire ASEAN region, there are many other companies in here that will benefit from relying on emission factor that we can cover beyond what is in Singapore. So we believe really, if you think about it, what's the ASEAN emission factor registry, they'll be super powerful. And with that, you essentially are able to, first, you have consistency, comparability, you're helping the company in this region to be able to find a way to communicate using methodology, right, that's similar internationally and recognized. I think that's a powerful way for us to be plugged into the ecosystem globally and differentiate. Rather than you have international standard that sets themselves that may disadvantage some of the companies that's operating in this region. So I'm super excited about this and can't wait for the second iteration to come from Ping Sun and the third iteration to come. And so we are working hard on this.
We talked about Scope 1, Scope 2. Yeah. That's pretty straightforward at this point. Scope 3, still a bit of a confusion, still a bit of a black hole.
So what's Scope 1? So anything that you control directly in terms of, let's say, electricity that you use. That's either Either the vehicles that you use in the plants, for transportation, that's one. Scope 2 is very simply electricity that you purchase in Singapore to power your plant. That's Scope 2. Scope 3, very simply, is everything that's not directly under your control. It could be upstream, downstream. Very simply, upstream means that whatever the products that you buy for, what are those emission or the carbon that's associated with it, right? On downstream could be anything that you sell to the customer that's directly relating to the waste, directly relating to what your customer actual impact on the goods that you sell to them. So the scope 3 is the one that is most complex, actually, because 1 and 2 is much easier to do. Scope 3, it's
Not
also
so straightforward.
not so straightforward. There are multiple areas that you have to consider, the adjustment that you have to take into consideration, and there's a worry about double counting. That's another area. There's also a worry that if you are not using the same level of factors, you may be disadvantaged and you may calculate more than what you think it is. So scope 3 is the one that's outside your main control domain. Very simply, upstream, downstream.
But why is scope 3 is important? Because for most companies, scope 3 emissions account for 80% of the total emissions of a company.
Right.
And to add another level of complexity, there are 15 categories of this scope 3. Purchased goods and services, waste generated from operations, finance emissions. So that is the challenge that's actually faced the SEFR. Where are you going to start? There's 15 categories, right? Yes, we have done the first 200 EFs that meet most of scope 1, scope 2, but how do you tackle the scope 3? So we did extensive consultations with companies that have to do such reporting, with inputs from preparers like PwC, and we use a very simple 2x2 matrix. Number 1, materiality. Number 2, are there factors out there internationally that we can actually use that doesn't make much of a difference anyway? So with that, we landed on 3 categories of scope 3 emissions factors that is quite important that contribute to purchased goods and services. So cleaning services, security services, and professional services, which of course include the consulting companies, the legal services. These are the type of goods and services that most big companies would buy, even SPH, for example, right? And so we have been working with the Cleaning Association, Security Association, with ISCA, and with a representative pool of companies in this to generate a set of localized emission factors, which can then convert the amount of time that the company purchased from a security company or cleaning service companies into a set of GHG carbon emissions that they can use for their scope 3 reporting. And there's urgency to do that because, as I mentioned earlier, the scope 3 reporting, at least for the big listed companies, remains by FY 2026.
Right.
So we better
So
get
3
this
years.
ready. Exactly. So it's not delayed.
But if it's scope 3, that means everybody is involved in the reporting, including smaller companies, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if I'm just wondering, if you are a big company and you have to start reporting in 2026, but the smaller companies have got a delay in reporting.
So that's why the industry average ES becomes useful, right? So let's say SPH is going to engage a cleaning company to do your thing. Now you don't need to ask the cleaning company, what is your ES? In your contracting with the cleaning company, I'm just making things up, a few hours a day.
Okay.
So there's a number of hours you have multiplied by number of days, and then you use a factor that we generate. Because this factor is not specific company that you get, but it's representative of the cleaning sectors in Singapore. And these services are in Singapore. So you take that factor, multiply with the amount of hours you contract, and you get your carbon emission. So now I relieve the need for individual cleaning company to generate it, because I now give an industry cleaning average emission factor for those companies that need to report scope 3.
So you want to take an approach where you can solve it by relieving the pressure on the SME, right? But at the same time, being able to comply with the requirement that is suitable for here. And for the SME going forward, actually, imagine even for them, the compliance requirement is much less. Because once we can sort this out, any of the stuff that they use is much easier for them to do.
But for the more progressive company, and I'll take this discussion a bit further, we're talking a lot about industry averages EFs.
Right.
There's a thing called product carbon footprint.
Right.
Meaning at
Right,
that
right.
product level, what is your carbon emission? Now, SMEs are probably not ready for that, but there are many Singapore companies that are quite prepared because they believe that by publishing a carbon-based emission factors that is based on their product, it can differentiate them from the market. And SEFR, other than abiding by international standards for the computation of this EF, we have also signed up to the PAC. PAC is a Partnership for Action for Carbon Transparency. It's being done by this organization called, another long acronym, it's called the World
There
Business
seems
Council.
to be a few of them.
Yeah, it's a whole alphabet soup of different organizations.
Kingston likes to have acronyms.
It comes with acronym. So it's called WBCSD, the World Business Council of Sustainable Development. It's a bunch of 200 odd international companies that account for significant contribution to global carbon footprint. So what it does that our methodology is aligned to PAC, which means that SEFR, and we are the first global national emission factor registry that is part of this PAC network. What it means that if you publish your product carbon footprint there, it abides by international standard and it allows companies to access. Very abstract. I'll give you one example, right? So one of the companies that publish their PCFs on SEFR is a company called Razer. I think many companies, many of the listeners would know about Razer. As you know, they sell many of the computer peripherals.
I think all of us have Razer products somewhere in our
Very
office.
good. So where would you buy, the Razer product? In the US, maybe you buy from Amazon. Guess what? Amazon, because it's a progressive company, has started to ask for product carbon footprint as a differentiating factor.
Right.
And it's in their search algorithm. So when you go Amazon and search for mouse peripheral and all that, if you say that I want to be a bit environmentally conscious, then Razer's product is going to be listed on the top, above those who have not published their data and all that. And Razer actually reported increased sales because of that, right? So this is a very good example of how the companies who's progressive, who are publishing their emission factor beyond a company to product level, actually generate more sales.
Okay.
I think the product level, I would say carbon footprint, right, is taking off, especially in Europe, has some impact,
Sure.
right? But I think what we can expect is that the rest of the world are still continue to push on, and the product differentiation on carbon footprint will come full steam in time to come. And so any of the companies in here, the larger company, I think will all get ready. But the SME that's coming out, and to think about, firstly, what do you want to tell the world in terms of where your product carbon footprint? That's the one that you can differentiate in the market. And the more that they can do that, whether it's in retail that we see, in electronic products that we see, which is one, in components or electronic products that's produced in here, you will get a different set of customer and a different set of buyer in Europe as compared to what you have today.
So what's the resource portal?
That's a great one. Resource portal. Someone will say, why do we come out with a resource portal? Then I will let Ping Sun explain why he need a resource portal.
Why are you always directing all these difficult questions to me?
That's why you're sitting over there.
Yeah, that's why I'm sitting over there. Well, I go back to the 3 M's that I talk about, right? That SMEs face challenges. Right? I mentioned, and since you said, the first M ought to be money and not manpower, the government do have an enterprise sustainability reporting grant, in that formulation of words. And it provides up to 30% support, if I remember, up to 150,000 for companies to do their first report. So that's addressed. Manpower, there's a lot of training, but beyond training, the government actually has a career conversion program for sustainability professionals, of which SBF is one of their partners. But it's a center one, the so-called methods. So this NetZeroHub.sg is actually a resource portal by the industry for the industry. We want to be a trusted platform to put together not just playbooks, but resources such as where they can go for training, resources or where they can find the right solutions, where they can get the government grants, as well as the events calendar. We're happy that since we launched it, about a year ago together with the SEFR, over 800 to 1,000 organizations have benefited from it. But as with all of such digital portal, it gets up to date the day that you launch it. So there's a lot of work that goes behind it to curate the content, keep it updated, and to refresh it with newer features as we go along.
You talked about collaboration. The public sector, the private sector, trade groups, all of that came together. Right? But we have examples, and we have all seen cooperation can stall. So what makes this different, and how do we keep the momentum moving forward?
Well, I think Marcus from a PwC who have much more experience in putting together all this.
If you asked me this question about 4 or 5 years ago, I may not say it is sustainable. But today, I believe that the initiative and what has been launched, it's the word sustainability, say it's highly sustainable. SEFR is it's a must in the market. Whether it's done by us or done by someone else, and it has to be a collaboration between industry, government, and private. That's the only way to sustain it. If you look at the international one, that's how they have sustained it. And our question more for ourselves is, don't keep it to Singapore. Be bold, go to ASEAN. That's the differentiator. And we take the lead, we take the charge. Everybody in this industry in Singapore and elsewhere will benefit from it. So I see that this is a blueprint for many people in this region that could do better. So when we are looking at this initiative at the moment, there is alignment of three things very clearly. Alignment of goal, alignment of the interest, alignment of the challenges in the market. I firmly believe this will continue.
So we certainly look forward to PwC leadership, in bringing this resource
Wow, this
portal
guy
beyond
Tai
Singapore,
Chi.
to the region.
What does failure look like if this doesn't work out, if it falls short?
Cliche to say, obviously, failure is not an option, Failure is never in our plans. But I suppose what failure looks like would be, many of our companies, are not doing the reporting. They don't get the urgency to do it. And as a result, they will be, as I mentioned, potentially green out their supply chain for SMEs and all companies, notwithstanding the fact that, yes, the headline may sound that, there's a delay in the mandatory requirement. Don't wait, right? If you don't know where to start, go to NetZeroHub.sg, right?
Resource portal.
Resource portal. And then after that, if you still haven't really figured things out, you can call SBF. We do have sustainability advisors who can walk the journey with you.
I love his rallying call. Just on your point about what does failure look like, okay, maybe we take a step back. We are export-oriented economy, 80% export-oriented. We are aviation hub, logistic hub, financial hub, right, trading hub, entire open economy. And so what do we depend on? Trade flows, finance flows, aviation flow, and all those, right? If you are not forefront in here and be able to make sure that it's not about compliance, it's about meeting the customer need. It's about differentiating ourselves. If we don't do that, I think we'll be in big trouble to stay ahead. So I don't see it as meeting a requirement by the government on net zero. I see it as, sad to say, existential for an open economy here to be able to continue to punch above the weight. And if you don't do that, then clearly we'll fall behind. Decarbonize and position yourself, right, for your customer and seek an advantage in the market.
Sounds like it's actually an opportunity.
Yes.
Very much so.
It is.
Let's turn compliance to competitiveness.
Yes.
Right. That it's been a great conversation, and I certainly learned a lot more. I got clarity. Thank you so much, gentlemen. That's it for today's conversation. My thanks to Marcus Lam from PwC Singapore and Kok Ping Soon from Singapore Business Federation for joining us. This podcast by PwC Singapore is produced in collaboration with the Business Times. Until next time.